Stevenson, 48 minutes, 3:55 to the drive. Ryan, 38 minutes, 95th to downtown. I-57, 27 minutes, ID to the merge. Bishop 424. That's traffic. I'm Jim Calamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center, partly sunny and chilly, high 29, a low of 9 overnight, currently 17. Next news at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So Rod Blagojevich, sentence commuted by the president, has returned to his home in Ravenswood for the domestic bliss he used to enjoy.
Well, you know, they had moments, he and Patty, that's for sure.
Why are you talking so weird? What's you're not right. What's the deal? Are you not?
Let me close my door.
Yeah.
Okay. What?
Yeah. Go ahead, what?
I think Jared Roper was in here today.
Yeah.
Speaks well of you, but of course he would to me.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to hang up on you. What are you doing? What is this?
Well, what? What do you want me to say? You got to see what they say to you at 1. I tried to be helpful, and you jumped down my throat.
Okay, fine. Okay,
What
yeah.
else can I say to you? I got nothing else to say about it. You tell me I don't know anything, so I'm sitting here, I'm listening. Tell me.
That's good. All right, that's it. Be normal. I don't like you talking in some weird way. I don't know who the you are when you're doing that.
What are you talking
If I whispering, what is this bull?
That's your new WLS morning drive team. Blago and Patty in the mornings. I should get that fired up over there by March 1st, I suspect. For more on the commutation as well as the case, which still being litigated in the public, really,
yes.
Not just the sentencing, but who was and wasn't caught up in the prosecution of Rod Blagojevich. We're pleased to be joined by Patrick Murphy, who was FBI special agent, part of the Blagojevich investigation. Patrick Murphy, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Amy.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
So what did you think of the president's decision? Had Blagojevich served enough time in your estimation?
I thought Judge Ziegel's sentence was more than appropriate, if I recall right. If you actually followed the judicial guidelines, he was facing more than twice that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the context of some other sentences, I still think it was fair. That being said, I really didn't have a strong feeling about if, in fact, the decision was based purely on the belief that he had done enough time. But if it was at all based on some suggestion that the investigation and prosecution was anything but done fairly improperly, then I'd strongly disagree with that.
Now, when he got out of prison, he was still defiant, no contrition, no apologizing. Do you think Blagojevich has learned his lesson?
No. No, other than maybe just being more careful.
Well, so his argument is that he was imprisoned for politics, the way politics is practiced, certainly in Chicago and Illinois, on a daily basis by all sorts of people in public office. Respond to that. How is what he did different? How would you react to that contention?
Well, the cynical perspective is maybe there is a lot of that going on, and he's just one of the ones that happened to get caught. That being said, I've dealt with a lot of public officials, and I'd say the majority, if not the vast majority, know where to draw the line. He had no sense of where that line was and just blew right past it. So, no, he went above and beyond the norm.
Take us back.
Of what's done here.
Yeah, take us back to that day that he was arrested. Why did you move in when you did?
There are a number of factors. One was that there were a lot of things that were going on that he was still doing corruptly as the governor, and so we felt we needed to act soon, much sooner than later. Add to that the fact that the Tribune had actually published a story 2 days before leaking the fact that we were recording Governor Blagojevich. So we were pretty much forced to have to go over it with the investigation. And the thought was arresting him was the appropriate way to go over with the investigation.
We talked to Rod's brother, Rod Blagojevich, and he said that different representatives of Jesse Jackson had run at him with cash and prizes if Jesse Jr. was appointed to that Senate seat. 1.5 million, 6 million were the numbers that he threw out. So if Rod Blagojevich had that information, and you, according to this account from 2018 in Chicago Magazine, had incriminating conversations, quote unquote, then why not get buyer and seller? Why just seller?
Well, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, and ultimately it comes down to the weight of evidence. There are a lot of, as Rob Grant, I listened to one of his interviews on other stations earlier, there was a lot of accusations, a lot of evidence of other acts that weren't charged. And it wasn't necessarily that they didn't happen, but it was just not enough evidence that we felt was needed to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So
you never had there's been competing narratives about why the FBI moved in when it did. He was going to appoint himself to the Senate seat. The Tribune was publishing these stories. He was about to consummate the deal. It just seems strange to me. I don't really feel like I've ever gotten a satisfactory, complete answer from the government about the timing of this when you're up on surveillance and you have buyer and seller. So the sale was ostensibly in process for some time. Certainly the conversations that have leaked look like he was provide evidence that he was shopping it. So how is it that it couldn't be put together to get seller and buyer again? I just am not clear on this.
Well, the timing there was negotiations in process at that time, but as you may recall, the Chicago Tribune published the story. I think it was the morning of December 7th or something like that. And at that point, Rod Blagojevich was basically in cleanup mode and in reversal mode, trying to cover his tracks and was canceling meetings and things like that. So at that point, there was nothing else to be gained by having the wiretap up because he was aware that his conversations were being recorded.
So at that point, there was no evidence that you had, not compelling evidence or evidence that you could have pulled together through witness testimony, statements adverse to interest from witnesses like Rob and Rod, for that matter, that would have identified criminal acts, criminal intent by a buyer for that Senate seat. Nobody.
I'm not saying there wasn't evidence, but I'm just saying that in the whole, and this is more the decision of prosecutors than me as an investigator.
Right.
Or frankly, I totally agree with what they thought, is that we just didn't have enough evidence on certain transactions to basically prove beyond reasonable doubt that there was a criminal action.
What was he about to appoint the Senate seat to himself?
That he talked about. I honestly don't know what was inside his head, but that was certainly something he talked about multiple times.
On the tapes?
Yeah.
And what about the tapes that, Blagojevich's perennial lament was release the tapes, all the tapes. And so what about any suggestion, and I mean, again, we don't know, so it's an easy thing to say, to suggest something nefarious or something incriminating about somebody else. But what about that? What about, are there conversations on tapes that have not been made public that would be relevant to understanding what was happening and perhaps provide more basis for understanding the choices that were made by federal law enforcement?
No, I don't believe so. I truly don't believe so. And ultimately, that call was made by Judge Zabel, who I have a lot of respect for. So he applied the laws he saw it, and I think it was correctly so, to determine what recordings were relevant and what weren't. And the one analogy I've heard in the past, I think Judge Zabel used something similar, is you charge someone with bank robbery. You don't have to show that he entered the bank 20 other times and did not rob the bank. It's just the fact that he robbed the bank that one of the 20 times that's relevant.
Right, and that's fair, but there's also the argument that there were people who were protected. Now, again, this is a theory, but I want to get your reaction to it to respond to what people are saying. The idea that there were other people, to continue the bank robbery analogy, there were other people that were involved in conversations about the bank robbery that were not charged, that we've never heard about their role in the planning of this, and the names like Rahm Emanuel and Valerie Jarrett and Jesse Jackson Jr., whose name has been mentioned, but they come into this. And so people say, again, they were engaged in conversations with Blagojevich about a quid pro quo for a Senate seat at some level, and yet they walk away from this without incident.
Well, in any investigation, you have a lot of different people that might, in one aspect or another, get involved in the criminal activity, maybe tangentially or even more so. But ultimately, you can only present in court what's relevant and what the government believes is sufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the activity occurred. And it's not the job of the government to reveal every aspect of the investigation. There's certainly avenues like FOIA to try to access that type of information. But as far as the criminal process, we're actually not allowed to disclose information that, frankly, isn't being brought before the court.
Right. Only Jim Comey can do that. That's an aside. So I strike that remark.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm objecting to myself. But with respect to with respect to those conversations, what about the assertion that the 302s of interviews with subjects, that's something that should be disclosed as well? Is there any information you think would be germane from the 302s?
Well, I wrote a lot of those 302s, so I'm not sure. Are you talking about the FOIA process? I mean, at this point, I imagine that there are a lot of FOIAs being filed to obtain those types of reports, and I'm not aware. I'm assuming that at some point, those 302s can be released, but I don't pretend to be an expert on that.
Yeah, I mean, from your perspective, I mean, I know it's not your call, but from your perspective, there's no reason that the public shouldn't be able to see those 302s at this juncture.
Again, I'm really not comfortable commenting on FOIA law and what the Privacy Act allows for.
Okay. But I mean, if the FOIA law, if it doesn't run afoul of the FOIA law, I mean, just sort of personally from a normative perspective, not a legal perspective, if there's no problem with the law, there's no problem with FBI protocol, there's no reason the public shouldn't see those 302s.
Yeah, I agree with that statement.
Okay. And what about Rod Blagojevich? Rob with a B, not with a D. What did his brother do? Why was it appropriate to arrest him and to prosecute him?
Well, we didn't arrest him, but he was prosecuted because he was directly involved in some of the corrupt transactions that his brother, the governor, was involved in. So at that point, Robert was the head of his campaign, and as such was very involved in some of the quid pro quo type transactions that were going on. Ultimately, the jury hung him, particularly with regard to Robert. He certainly wasn't acquitted by the jury, but ultimately the government decided to just focus on the governor for the retrial.
Right. But are you suggesting that Rob, though, that was a legitimate indictment for somebody who was materially participating in a criminal conspiracy of shaking down children's hospitals and selling a Senate seat?
Yeah, I believe the government was correct when we charged him the first time. I felt that there was some strong evidence against him.
Like what? What's the strongest evidence? What is the strongest evidence you think you had against Robert Blagojevich?
Yeah, I have to go back and pull the tapes, but there are conversations between Rob and Robert, and where clearly Robert knew what his brother was doing, and in some ways was facilitating some of that. But it's been so long, I couldn't specifically cite exact conversations. But I remember the time thinking that we had a pretty strong case against him.
I mean, again, we're holding you to remember these details from a decade ago, so I understand. But it just as well, I'm a little bit more than a layman, but as sort of a layman, at least with respect to this case. It just strikes me as odd. And by the way, I'm not a supporter of the commutation of Blago. I'm a supporter of the prison sentence that was handed down. It doesn't bother me at all. So this is not being an apologist for Blago. But with respect to Rob, the way that you characterize that, so he's materially involved in these conversations, and that's what implicates him. And Jesse Jackson Jr., through emissaries, is materially involved on the buy side, but that doesn't implicate him. Can you see how people would be confused about those distinctions?
Well, I point to the weight of the evidence. Frankly, there was no recorded conversation of Congressman Jackson.
Was there an effort to get a warrant to surveil him?
Yeah, I can't comment on that. I believe that's not something that's out there in public domain, so I can't talk about that. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind that the investigation was cut short because of the Tribune story. We were still chasing down avenues of corrupt activity, but once that story hit, we had to pull the plug because at that point, Rod Blagojevich was totally in, I'll call it, cleanup mode.
At the point the Tribune stories were breaking, how long had the investigation been ongoing?
Well, the investigation started out with a shakedown in Naperville at Edward Hospital back in late 2003, early 2004. But it just kind of progressed from there. I mean, Rod Blagojevich was not a main target at that point.
But you were recording him and his associates for 6 weeks prior to the arrest?
It sounds right. October, mid-October, I think it was, or late October through December 8th.
So the investigation, though, going back to the Edward Hospital, the investigation had been ongoing for the better part of 4 years.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Patrick Murphy, he's former FBI agent who was on the Blagojevich case.
And arrested him that morning.
And, yeah, right. It's recounted. I'll tweet this out. It's a good piece in Chicago Magazine, chicagomag.com, about he and his colleague in that day, which provides some of the details that, they're hard to recall if you don't have, I guess, the photographic memory of a Rod Blagojevich, allegedly. Patrick Murphy, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And in this